Hello, everyone. Good evening. It's evening where I am right now. It is Sunday, July 23rd on my computer, and it is now 11:01 p.m. And as always, here, Candy the Wonder Pup, 3.5 years old, close enough, still has lots of puppy energy. And she's already sitting. She expects her treat. So, shake a paw. Shake a paw. No, shake a paw. Lady, speak. Oh, and that should keep Candy happy for the duration of this Sunday night freewheeling video. I'm going to make this a staple Sundays, at least for the foreseeable, till I go away and take a little trip, and one is planned in the future. But firstly, thank you very much to everyone who has watched, commented, liked, subscribed. I'm up to 118, which is unbelievable. This miserable, pathetic little YouTube channel. Interestingly, I'm now doing co-hosting a podcast. It's the podcast is, I'm going to use the word belongs to a friend of mine down in North Carolina. And he's asked me to come on and co-host with him. He calls it Wisdom and Knowledge. It's Mark's product, if you will. And we've had some interesting guests on. Most recently, a gentleman by the name of Jason Christoff, who is he calls himself a self-sabotage coach. Basically, what he does is he coaches people on how to unplug themselves from destructive programming that leads to individuals subconsciously self-sabotaging. And it was incredibly enlightening. It's certainly caused me to reflect on the content that I consume and the manner in which it has the potential to influence me, not just on a conscious level, but on a subconscious, reactionary level where you're not even aware. Call it the enemy within yourself, because the programming that we receive, and I'm going to touch a bit on that tonight. But I'm talking about tonight, I put up as the title to this one on top of Freewheeling Sunday, how Marxism, how fascism is wearing something of a Marxist disguise. How it is my contention, my belief, that this great reset agenda, you can call it the Fourth Industrial Revolution, you can call it UN Agenda 2030. There are lots of different labels that are put on this agenda. There's a lot of chatter, a lot of talk of it being a communist agenda. And ultimately, I do not believe that it is, but it has trappings. It has outward manifestations of look, and it looks somewhat communist in nature. And the thing is, communism, or more accurately, Marxism, is popular among young people. And there's a quote that gets shared around. You have probably seen it. And it goes either exactly like or very close to what I'm about to say. And the quote is this: if you're not a socialist by the age of 20, you have no heart. And if you're not a conservative by the age of 40, then you have no brain. Or words to that very similar effect. Talking to the idealism of youth versus the wisdom of age. And this quote is often attributed to Winston Churchill. You'll also often see it posted to a social media platform like a Facebook, Instagram, whatever. and they'll superimpose the words over an image of Winston Churchill, who was a famous prime minister of Great Britain during the Second World War. The only thing is, there's no recorded history. No one's able to verify that Winston Churchill actually said or wrote those words anywhere. And it's a popular theme. I mean, I like the quote. I think it has a lot of truth to it. And whoever came up with it, by attributing it to Winston Churchill, if it's been put out there by an obscure individual, by attaching it to Winston Churchill, its currency goes up in value and people share it. I'm not going to share a quote by Joe Schmo, but Winston Churchill famously said. But regardless, I prefer to look at ideas based on the ideas themselves, not by necessarily who said it. An idiot can say something incredibly smart, and a genius can say an incredibly dumb thing. But Marxism is a popular ideology with youth because it speaks to equality, fairness, and hence why they say, or this famous quote that no one knows exactly who started it, about if you're not a socialist by age 20, you have no heart. I remember being back in first year university at York University in Toronto, and at that time there was a strike, the TTC, which is the Toronto Transit Commission, the buses, the subways. Their workers had gone on strike, and it was having a significant impact at York University because York is something of a commuter school. I don't know exactly how many undergrad students it has, but if memory serves, I think it's 30-ish, maybe 40,000. It's a very large school. Ontario, province of Ontario, Canada, I don't know how many universities exist in this province, but it has to be 15 or 20. And they're divided into large universities, medium and small. York, U of T, York and the University of Toronto are big. Then there are a large number of medium ones, like Guelph University, Queen's University. And then we have a large number of small universities, Laurentian and Sudbury, Windsor, Nipissing up in North Bay. And York was being impacted by this TTC strike significantly because a large number of the students traveled in by subway and bus. And I remember at the time putting forth the idea and saying, well, in this country, or in Ontario, every province in Canada has a minimum wage. Certainly Ontario did back then and does now. It's a minimum wage. And I openly speculated, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's come up with this idea. But I said, well, how about a maximum wage? How much does a person need to earn in a year? 10 million? 100 million? Why don't we pick a figure? And then have 100% taxation over and above. Like once you made $10 million in a year, how much money does a person need? And that was my view, 19, 20 years of age. Has my view changed? Somewhat. Not entirely, though. It does still occur to me, how much money does a person need? Bill Gates, Soros, Jeff Bezos with Amazon, Warren Buffett. How much money do these people actually need? I don't know what the net worth of the Mark Zuckerbergs or the Elon Musks or the Warren Buffetts of the world is, but it's more than they could spend in several lifetimes. And so maybe it would be an idea to stick an arbitrary, very high limit on it and not impact their quality of life in any tangible way. But that's neither here nor there because it's never going to happen. So let's talk about this idea that this agenda, I'm contending it's a fascist agenda. I've put out videos before talking about the fact that it's the WEF that's kind of driving the bus. Klaus Schwab, he and another individual co-authored a book called The Great Reset. He has another book called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. And the World Economic Forum has all the world's major corporations are members, if not all, pretty much all of them. The Googles, the Procter and Gamble's, all the world's major corporations, or if not all, damn near. So they're the corporate money. And then you have government. And as everyone knows, Justin Trudeau, or I think in the most recent meeting that they had down in Davos, Switzerland, Canada was represented by Chrystia Freeland, our deputy prime minister. Stephen Harper's gone there. John Chrétien probably too. I mean, it's not right or left. It's not liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican. They cover both sides of the aisle. So you have this convoluence between major corporations and government, and they also have academia. And again, it's the corporate sector that often drives the bus, that gives a lot of money to educational institutions. And I'll give you one example. During the COVID era in Ontario, we had something called the Science Table. And the Science Table was dominated by individuals who were from the University of Toronto's Dalla Lana School of Public Health. And it's not Dalai Lama, it's Dalla Lana. I don't know who Dalla Lana is or was, but it's spelled D-A-L-L-A, Lana, L-A-N-A, Dalla Lana School of Public Health. And they dominated. They were someone from the Dalla Lana School was always the chair. And most of the individuals on that science table were from that same institution. And that's an institution, if you look into it, and I have, they are financed by they receive funding from the pharmaceutical industry. And so we're all familiar with the line, you don't bite the hand that feeds. So what I see happening in the world right now is to get the buy-in of, well, in particular, young people. Everything we're seeing, whether it be critical race theory as Marxist ideology, this dividing of the population. When Mao introduced his so-called Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution is another name it was given. In China, Mao Zedong, communist, one of the things they did in China was to divide the population into basically 10 racial groups. So yes, you're Chinese, but there were categories within what I'll call the Chinese race. And 5 of them were the oppressors, and 5 of the groups were the oppressed. And who got hammered were the oppressors, according to the powers that be, the Chinese Communist Party. And we see the same dynamic playing out now. So a lot of this agenda has Marxist or communist, if you will, trappings, but ultimately the hands on the wheel driving the agenda, it's the corporate sector. And the corporate sector is ultimately interested in fascism. There's a line, well, I came up with this line on my own, but this notion of the political spectrum being, this is my right and my left. This notion of it being far left and far right being diametrically opposed, well, others, and myself included, contend that the political spectrum ultimately is a circle, and that the far right and the far left, that they meet at the juncture of authoritarian boulevard, because ultimately it's an authoritarian, tyrannical system. It's just a question of whose hands are on the wheel. In the case of communism, Marxism, it is the state. The state is the ultimate. They own what Marx referred to as the means of production. So private property is goodbye. Whereas in fascism, the corporate elite, for lack of a better word, the corporate sector, or if you want to go back in history, it used to be called the industrialist sector. They're the puppet masters with their hands directing the government of the day. And it doesn't matter whether that's, Franco in Spain, obviously the most classic example of fascism, Hitler in Germany, the Peronists down in Argentina. Like, fascism is a popular system. And it should be noted that during World War II, when Hitler signed a non-aggression pact with Stalin in the old Soviet Union, basically told Stalin, I'll leave you alone. And the Bolshevik Revolution in formerly Tsarist Russia, which then morphed into the Soviet Union, by the 1930s, they were still only a couple decades in. Bolshevik Revolution basically happened right around the time of the ending of the Second World War, First World War, sometime around 1918 or so. That's when, and so in 28, 38, it's only been 10, 15 years, no more than less than 20, when Hitler signed this non-aggression pact. And Stalin would have been happy because the old Soviet Union was still very in its infancy. It hadn't attained the power that it would later, and certainly not after the end of World War II. And what Hitler did then was he turned his guns westward and, went at France, went at the Netherlands, went at Western Europe, and was stopped ultimately by the British. He got as far as the English Channel, and they never got boots on the ground in Great Britain. However, Hitler's aim was always to take out fascists and communists. The fascists hate communists because fascists are ultimately owned and controlled by corporate industrialist money. And that corporate industrialist elite does not want the government coming in and stealing from them the means of production. And so Hitler's aim was always to go east. Anyone who's done any reading on Mein Kampf will know that his goal was always to go east. They had a word for it that translates into elbow room. Hitler wanted to expand the German Empire, but his aim was always to go east, not west. And the important thing also to note is that Hitler had a lot of friends outside of Germany. Henry Ford received the highest civilian honor that the Nazis would bestow. He had a newspaper. He bought a newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, and he used that newspaper to publish his anti-Semitic screeds. And then later he took those writings, his anti-Semitic writings, and he had them published into a book, which was called The International Jew. But it's not just, the Nazis reached into the royal family in England and royal houses across Europe. The Bush family, Prescott Bush would be the grandfather of George W. Bush, who was president from 2000 to 2008. And he was the father of George H.W. Bush, Herbert Walker Bush. George Herbert Walker Bush was president from 1988 until 1992. So Prescott Bush was George H.W. Bush's dad, George W. Bush's grandfather, and he was a director at a bank in New York City that was shut down for engaging in financial dealings with Nazi Germany. The Nazis had corporate backing en masse. The Rockefeller Foundation also was a backer. They funded the Kaiser Wilhelm School of, and I don't have it in front of me, it was this Kaiser Wilhelm School of Anthropology, Genetics, and Eugenics. And you can look that up. They financed it, and they gave the Nazis what I'll call scientific cover for their programs of the eugenics based programs, and they basically put out a hierarchy with Aryan blue-eyed blonde-haired Germans at the top, and way down at the bottom there, were among the bottom were the Jews, who were classified as a subhuman, inferior race. And because it was being put out there by this Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, any Germans speaking out against it, I think gaslighting went on during the COVID era. Same thing I'm sure happened in Germany. Someone who would dare to express the truth that Jews are not inferior to any, there's no superiority of the races. Oh, you know better since the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. You are now a geneticist, a eugenicist. You know better. And so, but I'm getting sidetracked a bit. But that's what Freewheeling Sundays is all about, just going wherever my brain takes me. So ultimately, what we're looking at, as I see it, is it's not a Marxist agenda. It's a fascist agenda, but it has the trappings of Marxism. You'll remember that at the end of World War II, the Russians, Soviets, and the Americans, the Western Allies, were basically in a race to get to Berlin because they wanted the secrets that the Nazis had been working on. And in the closing days of the war, as the war ended, a large number of senior ranking German officials were they either went to the Soviet Union or they went to the US. And what the Nazis had learned about propagandizing the population, how to control the population, a lot of that information went into what emerged to be the two world's superpowers, the Soviets on one side, the Americans on the other. And then we entered into an era of we're programming the population, how to think, what to believe, how to feel, has become highly sophisticated. And that's where this recent podcast that I did with my buddy Mark, when we had Jason Christoff on, and we've also had on Dr. Robert Malone. And you can watch both on YouTube here. The channel is titled Wisdom and Knowledge 5 or 5.0, but I think it's just Wisdom and Knowledge 5. And the reason behind that is there's a channel on here that already had the name Wisdom and Knowledge, so Mark just stuck a 5 at the end of it. I don't know why he picked 5, but what's in a name? So we have programming, and we get inundated. And Thursday, I was at work and I pulled out, I don't have a smartphone. I actually have a dead S3 that's not even hooked up to a provider. But it still allows me, if there's Wi-Fi, I can go on and look. And I mean, everyone sits there staring at their device. So I decided to check what's in the news. What's in the news? And I saw countless articles on, this is Thursday around 11 o'clock in the afternoon, or 11 o'clock in the morning, 11 a.m. And there were all these stories about the body of a 2-year-old child that had been found after having been washed away. And uh, due to severe flooding of a river in Delaware. And it was ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, BBC, Britain's Independent, and countless. I even think there was an Al Jazeera story on it. It was global that this child's body had been found. And there was also the still to be found body of her younger brother, who was also washed away. And tragic. I don't mean to, I'm in no way am I suggesting that this isn't a tragedy. However, in a planet of 8 billion people, or in a country the size of the United States, which is 330 million, 340 million, not sure, or Canada with our 40 odd million, that every single day, probably every hour, maybe every minute of every day, there is a tragedy happening. And why does this one get so much attention? It certainly pulls on the heartstrings. The death of a 2-year-old child, that hits you where you live. Likewise now, just today, there's another story that's going viral, certainly in Canada, and it relates to severe flooding in Nova Scotia. I think it's in the Halifax area. Apparently, there was a man-made lake, and this man-made lake had recently, or had a number of years ago, been drained, and more ecologically friendly mudflats had been allowed to return. But developers and big money interests wanted that artificial lake put back, because there was a property development company, and it would make their properties to have waterfront, to have a view of a nice lake, that it would increase their property values. And there were a number of other reasons. Individuals wanted the lake back. They didn't want the mud flats. And so the decision was made to go back to the lake, and they basically dammed it up. And then when the floodwaters were rising, one of the ways that could have mitigated the damage was to drain this lake. But apparently it wasn't done in time, and it's been reported that 4 people have lost their lives. People were washed away, people drowned in their cars when they couldn't escape. And it's horrific news. And it's centered on, ultimately, the way it's being packaged is around the climate change narrative. And it's in a loop. And it comes back again and back again and back again. Repetition, 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 until it becomes embedded into people's subconscious that human activity on the planet is irrevocably damaging our world, and that we're going to have privations of biblical scale, and everything and anything and everything that can be done to stop climate change has to be done. And of course, the big bad boogeyman is carbon, for whatever reason, a trace element in the atmosphere, not even 0.1%. But whatever, what do I know? I don't have a degree in meteorology or any other climate discipline. And goodness knows if I did have a degree, and unless I was willing to conduct research which pointed to global warming being a significant problem, then I would get zero funding from the IPCC, International Panel on Climate Change, or from governments like Canada's government, because it's the big bad boogeyman. And going back to the video that I did all the way back on April 30th, predicting that there would be the declaration of a climate emergency sometime this summer of 2023, I still see that as being in the cards. I'm going to have, at what point it comes, my bias has me thinking, or My thinking is that it's going to be the latter part of the summer, late August, early September. And the reason for that is because I think they want to hit, I think there's potential for us to get hit fast and furious on a number of different fronts, climate change, and then while we're still digesting that, maybe get hit with a new strain of COVID, maybe what is being billed as a triple-demic, flu, RSV, and COVID, and goodness knows, maybe it'll be a quademic. Maybe they'll throw in this Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever or Marburg virus or goodness knows what else. And then, of course, there's the potential for, we have the Russian and Ukrainian war escalating already, at least according to the reporting. There are attacks being taking place against Ukrainian port cities that ship a significant portion of the world's grain, wheat products. And so we have the prospect for even more inflation to come. The world's gone crazy, but it's late. I've gone on for just over 30 minutes. I have to work in the morning, so I'm going to go get to bed. I wish you all a pleasant and wonderful week. And again, thank you for watching. Likes, shares, subscriptions, all that stuff. I see I already have one thumb up. Appreciate it. And if you're watching this later, and if you ever engage, if you ever jump on when the video is actually live, I always have the chat on, and I always enjoy engagement, someone commenting, asking a question, even telling me that you think I'm crazy, or you think I'm way off base on something. And anyway, we'll leave it there. Appreciate it again. And we will see you in another few days. We'll see what happens in the world. Good night and God bless.